We are finally coming for the Sword of Sargeras and going to Silithus. If you missed the interview from just a few months back, they once again hinted at someone coming for the sword. However, now with the roadmap and the datamined info for Midnight, it is likely that this happens as the Midnight finale. Based on the datamined info, we know the Sunwell conclusion, we can strongly predict that 12.1 is going to be a troll patch, 12.1.5 very likely around Undercity, and the last Titan will be announced in between. It is possible that Silithus is the transitional zone that leads us to Northrend. Think about it, Sargeras finally comes for his sword, goes to Northrend, the Titans return, we follow, with Illidan coming back as well. Let's look at all the interviews, data mine information, and everything. Since the announcement, I've always found it weird. I mean, how exactly are we jumping from continent to continent? First, we start with the sword in Silithus, then we jump to a random new location called Saga off the shore of Kalimdor, then we go to the Eastern Kingdoms. From the Eastern Kingdoms, we go to Northrend, but somehow Silithus is one of the main areas. Well, finally, after a ton of speculation, I mean, we have some information we can actually work with. Midnight is coming out in just 2 weeks. We're kind of in the middle of the saga, at least knowing where the content is actually happening. So from the beginning, Silithus and the Sword of Sargeras was really the main focus of the saga. It started with the sword. It seems to be focused on the sword. They had the entire what sword thing when they announced the saga. Then we had an interview from Chris Madsen where he told us that the sword will return, but it will be a 13th thing, meaning it will happen in the last Titan. Then, if you guys remember, a few months back we got the interview where they said that someone is in fact coming for the sword, that they had not forgotten about it, but they can't reveal much right now. So seeing that we saw the entire war within expansion, we know 2 out of 3 zones for Midnight, and we know the setting of the last Titan, we can actually talk with some information to back it up. If you guys seen the roadmap that was announced for 2026 just a few weeks back, you can see that Blizzcon is coming in September, which is a completely new date, and it is happening instead in the past right after 12.1 ends, which is coming out in the summer. Seeing that there was no Blizzcon last year, they didn't have much to announce, almost certainly this Blizzcon is going to announce the last Titan. I mean, it makes so much sense just looking at the map. We're talking last Titan announcement is September 12.2, very likely by the end of the year, which leaves us for a release next year, which means probably sometime next summer we are going into Northrend. Now, for Midnight itself, through the alpha interviews, various hints, we actually determined most of the locations of this expansion and what is going to happen. Some are certain, some are up for debate, but we do have the info. So, Midnight itself starts in Quel'Thalas, and the entire main story is about the Sunwell. As you can see, 12.0.5, 12.0.7 are going to be mini patches, just kind of escalating the void assaults, but we know what happens to the Sunwell. I mean, skip about a minute of this video if you don't want me to spoil the main story ending for the opening patch, but we know that the Sunwell gets turned into the Darkwell pretty much right at the gate, and the main storyline ends by us cleansing the Sunwell and turning it into the so-called Dawnwell. We still don't have the cinematics, all the info, but we datamined a bunch of dialogues, characters. You can check out my older video to see this in more detail, but the gist of it is that the various types of elves that wield the arcane, the void and such are going to unite. They're going to combine their energies like the light, arcane and nature to combine it into what we had datamined is like a rainbow colored Sunwell, which is going to be like a new fount of power for the elves, and it is going to be related to the Elven Reunion that is the main theme of this expansion. While I can't say that this is all that exciting or unpredictable, there is one really annoying thing for me here, and that is the naming convention that kind of makes it seem like Blizzard doesn't even follow their own lore that they literally wrote. What they're doing is just adding a source of power to the word well, so the Sunwell is like the light version, the Darkwell is the void, now the Dawnwell is a combination, and this makes all the sense if you don't know any of the lore. But the Sunwell isn't called the Sunwell because it is light or it is the color of the sun, despite that kind of being the common sense first impression. If you may know, the elves created the Sunwell long before they ever started wielding the light. It is called the Sunwell because of their highborn leader that created the high elves called Datrimar Sun Strider. So it is literally in honor of his name, but them just kind of adding dark and dawn makes it really a strange turn of events, like they forgot one of their most important historical figures. But I digress. The gist of the new info is that until 12.1 we are around the Sunwell, then we datamined 12.1 to almost certainly be the Amani troll patch with a giant datamined island right off the coast of Zulaman. We even recently got more Amani lore setups for this, so it is very likely that 12.1 is going to be the last patch until the last Titan announcement, and it is going to be troll based. Now, based on the other info they mentioned with the lab Labyrinth Delves and datamined achievements, it does appear that 12.1.5 is going to be about Undercity and the Lordaeron area, which does raise the question, what is 12.2 going to be about? Now, this is the topic of the video. It seems very likely that it is going to be around Silithus. I always found it weird how they're going to announce the final Saga expansion right after 12.1, and the reason for that is probably because we already know about Silithus and we know it is going to be relevant. We saw it from the start, so it wouldn't really be a spoiler. I mean, by 12.1 we already kind of deal with the Void and the Remnants, and Zelda is probably focused now on Silithus and whatever is going to happen there. It also makes sense, I mean, with the transition to the Last Titan. The Last Titan has been confirmed to include the return of the Titans to Northrend. Also, Chris Metzen himself hinted at Illidan and Sargeras return in this expansion as well. Sargeras coming for his sword makes the perfect transition into the Titans themselves returning, the entire Northrend thing happening after that. Why would we otherwise just jump randomly to Northrend? The Titans would just spawn like without anything happening. Almost certainly some really critical event is going to happen that is going to trigger the return of the Titans. Keep in mind, they never arrived to Azeroth in their full form, so something really bad has to happen. And what can happen other than the sword? It is also going to reveal the entire hint that Sargeras obviously aimed at something. It is really going to be like the last minute where urgency really starts ramping up. So it will make sense after the Amani storyline, we get the Last Titan announcement and we know we are set for Silithus. First we wrap up the loose ends in the Eastern Kingdoms, like around Undercity and the whole area, and after that we are off for Silithus, which would be the last transitional zone that would ultimately lead us to Northrend and the Last Titan. It is very important to note also that Silithus is insanely relevant to the elves and the trolls, and not just because of the sword and what is currently happening. First, the trolls in ancient history battled the old god beings, and some 1,000 years ago there was the War of the Shifting Sands here that involved the Night Elves and the Dragons, so it will be very relevant for the entire theme of the Void battle combined with the Sword of Sargeras. Of course, this isn't for certain. I mean, it is certain that Silithus and the sword will happen, it will be relevant, they confirmed that multiple times, and this was the opening cinematic of the saga, but it still isn't certain whether this happens before the Last Titan or after the Last Titan as like the finale of the saga. However, seeing how we are going to be around Northrend, I somehow feel like the finale is going to happen in Northrend, and very likely with us returning to Kazakar, where we know the World Core Titan prison is, and I feel like they're saving some crazy opening hype cinematic for the Last Titan, like it is going to be the most exciting one, like Sargeras returns for the sword and then goes to Northrend together with the Titans, and then Illidan comes back by like the ending of the cinematic. That definitely is a big possibility with the way the lore has been developing. It has also been strongly hinted that Kazakar will be the final location of the saga, as really the story in the War Within didn't cover anything at all. Nothing was really solved, and we know that Azeroth's prison is there. So Silithus being in Midnight makes the most amount of sense. Otherwise, I don't see how they would leave everything for the Last Titan, going to the entire continent of Northrend, then going for the sword, then going to Kazakar. Also, the Titans just chilling in Northrend, but the sword is still being unmoved. Doesn't make too much sense. It's likely that first something happens with the sword, and that triggers the Titans' return. Thanks for watching. Check out the likely Chronomancer and Lich pack that we could see in the saga by clicking on the screen, and check out my brand new Witcher lore channel that I just opened by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time.